Are you listening? Damn. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And welcome into another episode of the Damn Podcast here on the 24/7 Sports Podcast Network and powered by BeaverBlitz.com. I'm your host, Carter Bahns, joined as always by BeaverBlitz.com publisher Angie Machado. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this absolutely huge game recap episode of the Damn Podcast. We are reliving Oregon State's remarkable, miraculous comeback against Oregon in the 126th meeting between the Beavers and Ducks. It ends in an absolute classic with the Beavers coming out victorious 38-34 after trailing by 21 points at Research Stadium. We are going to relive all of it, talk about the impact of the win, rank it against some of the other games in this series, talk about the atmosphere, some of the injuries that came up. Of course, we will have a discussion about the Pac-12 refs. Look through the stat book. We'll go through some of the big plays, answer some of your questions, and revisit our keys to the game on top of pretty much everything else that we ad-lib throughout the show. I have a feeling we are going to go well over time as we recap this. Angie, I'll bring you in here and just get can you even put into words what your emotions are after that game, just from a media member standpoint, from an Oregon State alum standpoint, from the standpoint of somebody who worked for the university, what this win means for the Oregon State football program, for the state of Oregon, for the university as a whole, and for just about everybody who watched that football game. Can you even describe what it means and what your feelings are?
Yeah, I think all of those hats that you mentioned all kind of have a different impact, but they all are huge. So when I worked at Oregon State as a fundraiser, I'm thinking about how this win and how this season will help catapult fundraising for the athletic department. From a media standpoint, and as an alumni, I'm just proud of my university for, taking that step. But as a media member, and, you and I, Carter, it's yes, we're media, but we cover these guys, and you really get to know the coaches and the players, and we've watched them really persevere from some really dark spots, some really low places for this program. And to watch some of these young men and coaches take that step, I guess I feel proud for them. I feel happy that hard work has paid off. I feel there's a lot, but I'm happy for these young men and their families for being able to reap these benefits that all of this hard work is actually paying off.
Before we go any further, I have to remind everybody who's watching us live on YouTube, thank you for doing so, and for listening to us on your favorite podcast app. You can find us pretty much anywhere now, as long as you've got the right show page. We assume at this point, after a full football season, if you were an old listener of ours, you've probably found the new show page. But I have to remind everybody of this incredible offer we have at BeaverBlitz.com right now, a 75% off an annual subscription. Seriously, I cannot think of a better time to do it than after a win like this, when our content is at an all-time high, when discussion in the lodge is absolutely taking off. Angie, some of the benefits that come with this 75% off deal, you're not going to find it for pretty much the rest of the year.
No, in fact, we probably won't see this deal again until probably August. So what you'll get with this full year is you get the rest of this football season, the bowl game, the analysis there, the lead up, recruiting, early signing period, regular signing period in February. You'll get basketball coverage, you get baseball coverage, you have spring camp coverage, all the recruiting then for 2024 and 2025, transfer portal, going right into summer. Carter, there's no downtime. So and then you'll get all of next football season as well. So this is the time to do it. It works out to $26.85 for the whole year. If you want to do the math, that's $2.24 a month. That is cheaper than my Starbucks. So now's the time to do it. It's our Cyber Monday deal. It will be gone tomorrow. So it is definitely a time to join BeaverBlitz.
Now's the time to take advantage of that. All right, let's talk about some of the news that came out today on Sunday as we record this. The rankings update. Of course, you get the AP poll and the coaches poll that both come out Sunday morning, and Oregon State shot up both of those, moving up to number 16 in both polls, up from number 22. They've kind of been in lockstep with each other here for the last couple of weeks. Beavers up 6 spots to number 16 in the AP 25 and the coaches poll. The college football playoff rankings will come out Tuesday at 4 p.m. The Beavers at number 16 are now 1 spot ahead of UCLA and 1 spot behind Oregon. And I think the immediate reaction from Oregon State fans is, wait, what the heck? Beavers and Ducks are both 9-3. Oregon State doesn't have a 46-point loss on its resume and has a head-to-head win. Why on earth are those guys in Eugene ranked ahead of Oregon State? That was at least my reaction, and I think the reaction I saw on Twitter. Regardless, Oregon State has its highest ranking since late in the 2012 season when the Beavers were a top 15 team going into the Alamo Bowl.
Yeah, so a friend of mine sent me this tweet. Okay, this is just something to look at. So Alabama 6, Tennessee is 8, same record. Tennessee won head-to-head. LSU is ranked 13, FSU 14, same record. FSU won head-to-head. Oregon 15, Oregon State 16, same record. Oregon State won head-to-head. Utah 12, UCLA 17, same record. UCLA won head-to-head. So we're not the only ones out there. There's some question marks out there, but I'm anxious to see Tuesday what that CFP comes out with.
Potential for Oregon State to jump into the top 15 there, I think. Just going into this week, a spot higher at number 21 in the CFP rankings. They do value head-to-head, so they've said, and so we've seen in the past. Consistency is not always the name of the game with that committee, but we will see what happens there. Again, that's Tuesday at 4 p.m. Those are the rankings that we will go off of at BeaverBlitz as soon as they come out. The Beavers, of course, will have an off week this week and likely next week as they await their bowl game destination. So that ranking will probably hold somewhat steady over the next couple of weeks before the Beavers play their next game. That's the update on the rankings front. So Angie, let's talk about the impact of this win for Oregon State. We kind of opened it with it there, talking about what it means to a variety of stakeholders here. But let's start with our favorite memories in the rivalry series. All right. For me, going into this week, I would say probably 2016. Okay. That was the first win I had seen in person. I have vivid memories of standing there in the rain, watching that thing unfold. But there is no way after what happened on Saturday at Reser Stadium that I can say that anything in my lifetime tops the 2022 win as far as my favorite memory in this series.
Yeah, I can go back a little further. Now this one's right up there. And you guys know, I think most of you guys that have listened to the damn podcast for some time or been on Blitz know my absolute number one favorite Beaver memory of all time was the 98 Civil War. That game, just I think what it meant for the program and what, that double overtime win against a team Oregon was kind of had already turned the corner somewhat, had made their first Rose Bowl back in 94. What it meant, Ken Simonton, Jonathan Smith, that whole crew. 2000 was exciting. The Joey 5 picks. It was a day very much like yesterday where the fog lifted, 12:30 kick. Reser was jam-packed. It was loud. It was rowdy. And Oregon State took care of business from the get-go. 2016 was exciting, but this game was just bananas. We rewatched it this morning, Carter. I got up at like 6:30 this morning and made my coffee, and then we sat down and watched it and talk about, and we'll kind of go through this, I think, with our game flow a little bit, but, I felt like that first quarter, Oregon State really, they had a 3-point lead, but it felt like Oregon State was kind of in control. And then when the bad spot really kind of took some wind out of Oregon State sails. And then you had the interception, then they come out the third quarter, had the other interception. And it felt like, all momentum was Oregon. It felt like Reser kind of turned to a quiet, I think Eric called it a mausoleum. I mean, it was so quiet and it was just kind of, but nobody left. And then when things started turning around, you and I kept looking at each other and we're like, there's time.
What's happening? What's happening? Is this real life? Like, wait.
And then it became this whole, I mean, if I was to tell you, Carter, that Oregon State would have 6 pass completions in that game, 3 turnovers, and win the game, you would laugh at me and think I was an idiot.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of a look ahead to our revisiting the keys to the game. You and I both said Oregon State needed to get a passing game going. And of course they pass it 4 times in the second half. And none of that was during the 21-point comeback. They came back from down 21, scored 4 touchdowns without throwing the ball a single time. I think that is a testament to Brian Lindgren and Jonathan Smith just diving into Oregon State's identity, being one of those teams that wants to beat you at the point of attack, set the tone in the trenches, and just run the ball down your throat. And they did that for about 10 to 15 minutes as they pulled off one of the best comebacks I have seen in any sport at any level. And to do it on that stage too.
Yeah. Well, and then what was really interesting too is, so I saw somebody put this on Instagram. It was really interesting. So to tell you that they would score or have 6 completed passes, 3 turnovers, but to win that game, come back without QB1, without tight end 1, without running back 1, without starting center, without starting guard, with Marco Brewer being out, and then without one of your cornerbacks. I mean, it was unreal when you went down this list of how many guys then were kind of out that second half, and they still did it.
Yeah, I mean, Jonathan Smith will tell you no team is playing at full strength, but man, you look down the list of injuries the last couple of weeks for Oregon State, and I bet you would be hard pressed to find a team with more impact key guys missing time down the stretch. We'll get to that injury tracker in just a few minutes, but back to just kind of the big picture impact of this win. And I want to save some of this for a discussion later in the week and as we kind of gear up for bowl season and need some discussion points. But we have to talk about now this tying Oregon State's best regular season record since 2006. 2012, the Beavers went 9-3. 06, they won 9 games in the regular season as well. But if you look at that 2006 season, and that was actually a 13-game regular season. So as far as 12-game regular seasons go, this ties with 2012 for the most wins in a regular season since 2000, making it one of Oregon State's best football seasons in program history. Which, going into this season, Angie, you and I both said this team has the chance to do something special. You picked them to win 10 wins. I called you a little bit crazy, but said, you know what? I can see where it's coming from. They're now on the verge of their 3rd 10-win season in program history. They can get there with a bowl game win. And we're going to sit here after all of it is said and done and say, we just witnessed one of the all-time great seasons in Oregon State football history.
Yeah. Isn't that crazy? And I think Beaver fans are actually maybe starting to realize that. It's maybe starting to sink in. I asked that question a few times at the press conference last night after the game, because I don't think the players really quite understand that they have the chance with the bowl game to be the 3rd team ever in Oregon State history. And they kind of looked at me a little like they didn't know that, but I think it's sinking in with fans too. And that's one point, Carter, I want to make, is that I hope fans never lose that excitement of what a 9 or 10 win season really means, because I think you look at those guys down south, and a 9-win season, and there's guys throwing people under the bus, there's fans, jumping off the ship. I mean, because it's kind of like natty or bust. Okay. It's a really hard thing to do. And
then a lot of bust and not a whole
lot
of
bust.
natty.
Yes. But you see where I'm going with that? I mean, I hope Oregon State doesn't ever lose that sense of excitement for a really good season.
And, it's a discussion for another day too, but the ceiling at Oregon State obviously is a bit lower than the ceiling at Oregon as far as, facilities, money, donors, boosters, NIL, everything. You have to put everything inside this vacuum of, okay, well, what is realistic at Oregon State? And a 9-win regular season has been the ceiling.
Yeah.
Like this, Oregon State is at the ceiling of what it has set as kind of the precedent for success at this program. And it's going to be interesting to see if the Beavers can build on it and avoid the letdown seasons that we have seen, after these years. You go back to 2013, 2014, kind of that downturn after the last 9-win regular season. We'll see if they can sustain that success. Rivalry series history. Oregon State has now won 2 of the last 3 against Oregon. The Beavers have won each of the last 2 at Reser and 3 of the last 4 at home. We're starting to see the tides kind of turn a little bit. I mean, Oregon State obviously went a full decade without winning a game in this series before snapping that in 16. And now it's even, and if the game's being played at Reser, Oregon State has, like, you go into it thinking the Beavers are going to win.
Yeah.
It's been kind of fun to see it get more and more competitive over the last half decade. And to a point where at kickoff, Oregon State was favored in Vegas.
Yeah. Well, but you ask Duck fans, and Oregon State is not their rival. It's Washington. But I think if you look at the players, Oregon State was plenty rival for them with how chippy it went. I see Hunter in the comments wanted to make sure we didn't get punched after the game. We survived, did not get punched. So there was a lot of emotion on both sides of that game.
Yeah, and we had a brief discussion about this with Eric Scopel on Wednesday in our game preview episode about, well, what does this mean for Oregon? Like, hear Oregon fans say, oh, UW is the real rival. This game doesn't mean much against the Beavers anymore. Or it's not competitive, whatnot. I mean, the emotion that you saw on the field with DJ Johnson punching an Oregon State fan tells me it means a little bit of something to those guys over there as well. And I think Dan Lanning, being a guy who embraces rivalry, you saw him kind of dive into it as well. So there's that. It also, there's the impact of this as well, where Oregon State holds the Ducks out of the Pac-12 title game with that win, and Washington winning the Apple Cup sends Utah to go meet USC in Las Vegas. And Angie, I don't know if you read the story from John Canzano today about the Oregon booster dropping $11,000 on a suite at Allegiant Stadium at halftime. A little bit of buyer's remorse there. But yeah, no, I mean, anytime I feel like Oregon State fans and they'll never admit it, but the players and coaches, anytime they get a chance to hold Oregon back from something, it's a win in their books. And I have certainly seen that unfold throughout the fan base here as Oregon State basically said, no, sorry, your season's over.
It's interesting, like you said. I mean, Jonathan Smith he barely smiles. He's so stoic all the time. He cracked a smile or two in this press conference after the game, but it means a lot to the players. And you can see these guys on social media. Jonathan probably wouldn't like to see some of the FTD and some of that, but it means something to these guys too.
Looking at the postseason as well for the Oregon State perspective, again, this will be a talking point that we'll dive into over the next couple of weeks before we actually find out where Oregon State is going bowling. But looking at the Pac-12 standings, looking at the 2 teams that are making the title game, I come out of this thinking Oregon State has an increased probability of getting to a bowl game better than the Sun Bowl because of that win. And, we went into it saying that there was a bit of a catch-22 where, like, if Oregon State loses, maybe that propels Oregon up and you get 3 teams in the New Year's Six. And so, like, it's kind of a silver lining of losing. You might go to Vegas, you might go to San Diego. Well, now I think worst case scenario is Oregon State and UCLA are tied for that Las Vegas Bowl spot, with, the Vegas Bowl getting to choose between the Bruins and Beavers, and then the one that does not get picked goes to El Paso. So, we went from saying, okay, there's about a 95% chance that the Beavers are going to the Sun Bowl to saying, I think it's a little bit closer to 50-50 now, especially with the way these 2 teams, the Beavers and Bruins, have closed the season. I think there's something there. I think a bowl game would be willing to take a shot on the Beavs, considering the way they've played down the stretch, the way the fan base has showed out at these home games. The bowl games take notice of these types of things. So again, a conversation for another day as we gear up for bowl season. But I do think there is a chance that Oregon State kind of gets out of that El Paso or bust type mentality here.
I don't know. See, I always take the account that, if any team is going to get kind of screwed over, it's going to be Beavers. So I think the Vegas Bowl is definitely in play. But what I wonder is Oregon State's going to travel to Vegas, but UCLA has the bigger TV market. So what are those TV execs going to, and the bowl execs looking for? Personally, I think you go for the travel, because then that helps your hotels and all your restaurants. But hey, you saw that spot in the second quarter. You can't count anything in the Pac-12.
Are you saying that the fix is in?
I'm just saying I just don't trust anything.
You just can't count on them doing anything right.
I just can't.
Yeah. Okay, let's flip our attention to the game atmosphere, because Angie, this was your first trip to Reser this year. You and I went up to Portland at Providence Park and covered that game together. But for the most part, it's been a solo venture for me inside Reser, inside that press box. So I didn't actually get a chance to ask you after the game what your thoughts on the setup was, the temporary press box, the atmosphere, the fan base, the student section showing out and filling that section an hour and a half before kick. What were some of your takeaways on the atmosphere there at Reser?
The atmosphere was unreal for being a half full stadium. In fact, I love it. I wish if Oregon State can't sell out, you just put everybody on one side, because I think it just, it made it so loud. And of course it was coming at us. Temporary press box is nothing great. Just it is, and that's the reason that I most of the time stayed home to watch, because I was running game threads and the viewing angles are not good. But no, it was good to be down there. I got to see some people, got to be on the field. The field was unreal too, pregame. It just had that big game feeling to it. But no, the student section, I mean, hats off to those guys, because seriously,
literally
hats off. When Oregon State was down 31-10, and it did feel like it was just this quiet, kind of no energy stadium. I looked across thinking that we would have seen students starting to file out, and they didn't.
Yeah.
So Oregon State students, dude, I wish that the atmosphere was that good when I was a student at Oregon State.
To be fair, the enrollment is a bit larger now than it was at that time, and it continues to grow. And I think that's part of the reason we see this student section continue to grow and become more and more engaged. But I got to say, Angie, to see that section full, that entire bottom row of the east side of Reser full 60 to 90 minutes before kickoff on a consistent basis, but specifically against USC and against Oregon, it tells me that the students are engaged again, and that hasn't always been the case over the last decade. And they're loud too, and they loved the cowboy hat giveaway. I thought that was awesome.
It looked amazing. It looked good from the beginning, like when they were all lined up. And 6,000 student tickets were gone in, I think, 20 minutes on Monday. Crazy.
Incredible. I know some of those cowboy hats made their way into the locker room and made for some great celebratory pictures as well. So on the flip side, the energy, like you said, was so zapped from that stadium during the meltdown and during, when it looked like Oregon State was folding and just frankly giving up. But even then, you couldn't even really hear the Oregon fans. I know that their section was, up in the nosebleeds in Valley View, and the band was up there as well. But the just the lack of green that was scattered throughout the rest of the stadium, unlike years past. In years past, it's never been 50-50, but it's been closer to it. But I would estimate 80, 85 to potentially 90%. Orange and black there. So even when the Ducks were rolling, it never felt like a hostile environment for the home team. No.
And they never really did get any momentum when they started their meltdown. Their fans were so kind of just spread out. And there was another contingent kind of to the right of us down in the end zone. I did hear them a couple times, but no, it was home field advantage. And the fans need to take a bow, because it really does. And I can only imagine what it would have felt like to be on the Oregon State sideline, right? Right down there where you can feel that energy.
And especially during the comeback too, when it got
Yes.
with
It got
each
louder.
touchdown,
Yeah.
each of those 4 touchdowns got progressively louder, and then just at the end, just completely exploded. I mean, that is,
Yeah.
I will say, even at 28,000 or close to 30,000 with standing room only, that is one of the loudest moments I have ever heard at Reser Stadium, when the clock hit triple zeros and when they started pouring onto the field. Ben Gulbranson takes the knee and starts running over to the sideline. Jonathan Smith gets a bunch of water dumped on him by Winston Russell. That is one of the loudest moments I've ever heard at Reser Stadium. And again, just a testament to the fan base all year long showing up and making such a huge impact, even in a crazy year where half the stadium is off limits due to construction and you have like 2/3 of your attendance. Everybody who has showed up has been loud and engaged in every game, and none more
And it makes a
important
difference.
than this one.
I mean, Oregon had some moments that you saw them. Bo Nix had trouble getting his calls out or,
Yeah.
trying to communicate. So that it does make a big difference.
Very similar to what we saw against USC when Lincoln
Yes.
Riley and Caleb Williams had to burn 3 timeouts in the first, 20 minutes of the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Impressive stuff again from the Oregon State fan base. Okay, so we talked about how kind of the momentum changed when the Pac-12 refs did Pac-12 ref things, and that's when the energy was zapped from the stadium. That's when the players were literally walking during some plays, and everything just looked flat and frankly dead. Let's talk about it. This is a discussion we have to have, and luckily from an Oregon State perspective, we get to have this conversation in the context of a win rather than a loss, because I think if Oregon State did end up losing this game, that horrendous spot by the officiating crew would have been scrutinized even more heavily. Just because Oregon State came back and won this thing doesn't mean that they, that this call should fly under the radar and say, oh, well, it didn't hold Oregon State back. No, if you want change at the Pac-12 officiating level, we have to continue to beat this drum about how it's unacceptable. And for Oregon State to essentially have points taken off the board because they're at the 5-yard line, they're about to score, make it a 2-possession game. And then for it to flip and all the momentum goes to Oregon and the Ducks score multiple touchdowns in a row. All of that stemmed from a horrific spot that robbed Damian Martinez of a first down. The Angie happened on the 5-yard line,
Right
which
where
is
we were.
exactly where our seats are. My seat is on the 5-yard line. And in real time, you and I said, oh, all right, first down, here we go, first and goal coming up. Not only did they spot him short, despite his knees being across the 5-yard line, despite the ball clearly being close to, if not at the 4, not only do they call it wrong on the field, but they confirm it via review. They somehow had indisputable evidence to tell them that he was a yard short of the line to gain, and I still have no idea how.
So that one, that was the third down call. That was egregious. I mean, his knees were on the 5. So it's like they forgot the rules of football that you're supposed to spot where the ball is, not where the knees go down. So no, it was horrible. The replay showed it so clearly. It was no question, The second one was a little closer, but it should never have been to a 4th down call because he should have had the first down. And then going down a little bit later, it didn't end up mattering because Oregon State got the touchdown. But if you remember, so the other end of the field, Jack Coletto went in and he was clearly in for a touchdown that they said he was short. I mean, and it didn't go just Oregon State's way. I mean, Oregon State's were the most egregious and the most momentum killing.
Sure.
But I mean, and this is the same stuff that's been going on for years. I mean, I think back to was it Washington State game a couple years ago and some bad spots, a Washington game a couple years ago, horrible spots for Oregon State. And we keep hearing from the new commissioner that this is getting cleaned up, but it hasn't been. And I think Canzano tweeted during the game that you cannot let up. The media, the fans have got to stay on this because it's an embarrassment.
Yeah, PM also points out in the chat the phantom pass interference call against Oregon State, where the pass was about 5 yards over Chris Hudson's head. That's okay if you call holding, but if you call pass interference, it has to be catchable, and it clearly was not. So again, the missed calls went both ways. Oregon State, to the officiating crew's credit, I guess, has to come back on 4th down and convert that. The Beavers still got another chance to pick up a yard, and they didn't. on the third and fourth down play. But I thought it was eerily reminiscent of the 2020 season. And you saw multiple bad calls in that season just completely just show up again. This is, again, a consistent issue that shows up on an annual basis in this conference, where you go back to 2020, Oregon State's playing at Washington at Husky Stadium. Jermar Jefferson clearly gets 2 first downs and is called short on both of them on back-to-back plays. Again, right in front of me on my line of sight in the press box. And again, that we go back and we say that decision and that call by the officiating crew cost Oregon State that game. A couple of weeks later, Oregon State versus Oregon, Research Stadium. The very end of that game, Tristan Gebbia clearly sneaks in. They call him short. And then his hamstring gets torn on the very next play. Luckily for Oregon State, in that case, Chance Nolan snuck it in on 4th down and won it. But again, a potentially game-changing call, a career-ending call, essentially, for Tristan Gebbia, and something that shows up. And you saw both of those rear their head once again in this game. We don't have enough time to dive into this any further.
But even the ABC announcers, I wanted to hear what they said, and they couldn't even believe it, because they thought it was a first down, like you and I did at the right when he ran. Like, okay, Beavs got the first down, and then they're like, wait, they're gonna they're putting it at the 5. So they went back and watched, and they're like, they could not. They're like, okay, it'll get overturned, and then when it didn't, they were speechless.
I think potentially the most glaring just example of ineptitude there was the fact that they had measured it on 3rd down and said, okay, he's about 1.5 yards short.
But they didn't need to measure it because you can see.
Right. And then the measurement to begin with was unnecessary. But then the fact that they measured it again on 4th down, even though the ball was spotted on the exact same place, like, did we forget that we just measured this a minute ago? Well,
and they had the guy that came running in to make the spot was in the end zone. Yeah. It was just, I can't. I mean, something has to change, because it's just too many times. And so this is, we just named 5 times just in the past 2 years that it's happened that we know, like, egregiously to Oregon State. How many other times has it happened across the conference?
Yeah, a lot.
I
mean, go back to earlier this year when USC had the ball. I can't remember who they were playing. It might have been Arizona or something. And they were driving, and they had about 7 seconds left in the half. And just inexplicably, the refs say, all right, half's over. Time to go to the locker room. Yeah. It's mismanagement of the game on a continuous basis.
If that was SEC, those guys would not have jobs. Like, after that weekend, they would not have jobs.
Yeah. Again, didn't cost Oregon State the game, but it certainly looked like it was going to.
Yeah.
Let's move on to the injury update, because, again, like we said earlier, the injury bug continues to bite Oregon State. We saw Jack Coletto, James Griffin, Jaden Grant, Alex Austin, Deshaun Fenwick, and he didn't get in the game, but Tyler Morano, we assume, was available. All of those guys come back from injuries after missing the game at Arizona State last weekend. Anthony Gould was the lone holdout from last week's group of injuries. So, really a swath of Beavers coming back from injury, which was good to see them, especially the seniors, Coletto, Grant, some of those guys get on the field one last time at Reser after battling injuries the last couple of weeks. They weren't at 100%. John McCartan was clearly hobbled. He had that the ankle wrapped up and, left the game, came back after it was wrapped up again. So, these guys are playing through so much, but particularly for those seniors, you knew it wasn't going to hold them out in this game.
Jaden Grant and Jack Coletto, I hoped we saw them, and you knew that those two would do anything they could to be in that game.
Yeah. Trey Lowe was unavailable after standing on the sideline. Right. So, we saw Isaiah Newell come in a spot where we assumed we would see Trey Lowe. So he was clearly not good enough to go. Rajon Wright actually left this game around halftime. I think it was early 3rd quarter, if I remember right. And we assume it's a hand or wrist injury, because he came to the press conference with, kind of one of those air cast brace type things on his wrist.
This is where the TV sometimes helps. So I guess, remember when he went out a week or 2 ago?
Yes.
The TV crew said he was playing with a broken thumb.
Okay.
So maybe re-injured it, or it did look like a wrist though. And
yeah. So yeah, I mean, he did leave that ASU game midway through. We heard that it was a hand injury at the time. Some said that there was nothing wrong, but there was clearly something that
wrong.
flared up again
Yeah.
In that Oregon game. Damian Martinez also left the game after a 43-yard run, which actually, I think that was the turning point in this game. I think that sparked it. When Martinez had that 43-yard run, his night was done after he crossed the 100-yard mark for the 6th straight game. And then Jam Griffin, Isaiah Newell, and Deshaun Fenwick stepped up in his absence.
I'm hoping Martinez is not serious, though, because it looked like a knee.
Yeah. Jake Levengood is the other key injury that occurred in this game. And that was what, first or second quarter. And we were actually told, Angie, that he was good to go and that he would return. But he did not get back onto the field, and Tanner Miller took over at center. Again, these guys will have a couple of weeks to get back and fully healthy, but didn't look great at the time for either Martinez or Levengood. Levengood was down for a few minutes there.
Yeah, but he was walking without crutches post-game. I saw him celebrating in the locker room. So
one guy that I did see limping after the game was Kyrie Fisher-Morris, who left very late, I believe in the 4th quarter, with what looked like a knee injury. Again, another guy who came into the post-game press conference, but was clearly limping afterwards. So, we'll see. Like I said, they've got a couple of weeks, 14, 21 days, potentially more if Oregon State plays in one of those late bowls to get healthy again. But of course, injuries pile up at the end of the season, but you always hate to see it.
Yeah. I mean, I just hope these guys get well fast.
All right. We're close to the halfway point. Again, I have no idea how long we're going to go today. I think we're going to go pretty long as we recap this thing. There's so much to talk about, but we do have to take a quick break here to remind everyone about the 75% off deal we have at BeaverBlitz. Angie, tell the people about it.
Yeah, this is your chance to save 75% off an annual membership to BeaverBlitz.com, which will give you also access to the entire 24/7 network of sites. You'll get access to all of the great guests we've brought on. So all those Pac-12 sites, you can read their great work. You also have Greg Biggins, Brandon Huffman, Blair Angulo, Steve Wiltfong, a huge staff of recruiting experts, and the Lodge. I mean, Oregon State is the #1 independent source for all your Oregon State analysis and community. So definitely jump on. $2.24 a month is what it works out to. Total no-brainer. Join us. We'd love to see you. This deal ends tomorrow, Monday. So you don't want to miss the Cyber Monday deal.
Let's move into the stat book. And this is, again, Angie, the part of the show where we get to highlight some individual performances, position group performances, highlight some of the coaching decisions as well. And it starts with a look at the scoreboard where Oregon State ends up victorious at 38-34. But that 34 for the Ducks doubled the next highest scoring total by an opponent at Reser Stadium. So Oregon having really all sorts of offensive success against one of the best defenses in the conference. But it was those 4th down plays. It was a couple of special teams errors that cost the Ducks. And, 34 points at Reser coming into this, I think we would have said would probably be enough for the Ducks to win it.
Yeah.
But the Beavers, again, with just one of the all-time great late surges, come back from
I still don't know what to say.
From down by 21 points to post a 38 spot to outdo the Ducks by 4.
And so it just popped in my head again. So so Oregon was averaging 40 points a game. So Oregon State defense did hold them below their average. 2 of those they got on short fields because of interceptions. So they have 14 points on short field interceptions. But Oregon, I think Oregon State's the 2nd best rush defense in the conference, and Oregon was 1.
Flip.
Is that right?
Flip it. Oregon
State
had the #1 rush defense in the conference. Oregon was #2.
Oregon State just ran the freaking ball down their throats.
Yeah, and you look at the total yardage numbers. Oregon led that 470 to 328. Most of that was a product of Oregon State being on the receiving end of some really short fields during that comeback. And of course, that is what helped the Beavers to that comeback. Getting the ball at the 2, getting the ball at the 28, and having short fields to work with. But let's look at that rushing number because it was absolutely striking. We said this was a game that would be won in the trenches. It would be won with whichever team could establish the run game more. And Oregon State nearly doubled the Ducks up in that category, rushing for 268 yards against a top 20 run defense in the country. while giving up 143 to one of the best rushing offenses. This was one of our keys, Angie. This was a matchup that we highlighted at extreme length throughout the week, and Oregon State just absolutely dominated. And it started with Damian Martinez, who crossed the 100-yard mark for his sixth straight game with 103 yards, tying Steven Jackson for the most consecutive games, crossing the century mark at Oregon State.
I mean, unreal. I mean, we talked about keys to the game being that Oregon State was going to need to pass the ball. Oregon State became so one-dimensional, and they still were able to do what they needed to do. I don't even know like where to begin there. Disappointing on one end that Oregon State could not get the passing game going, but unreal. And it was funny because when I was writing, that's what she said for tomorrow. So I don't know. So Oregon was converting 70% of fourth down conversions offensively, but Oregon State was only allowing 42% defensively. I don't know if Dan Lanning just didn't look at that and thought they could just run at a 70% clip or what, but that was an interesting stat as well.
It was a whole group effort for the Oregon State running game. Martinez, of course, led them with the 103, but Jam Griffin on 8 carries goes for 75 yards, had a couple of big ones there. Deshaun Fenwick goes for 53 and a touchdown. So you got your top 3 guys all getting above 50 rushing yards, which is likely the first time that has happened since the Montana State game. I haven't checked, but I believe it is. And then Isaiah Newell didn't get above 50 yards, but he took 2 carries and they both went for touchdowns. And Angie and I were quietly celebrating for him in the press box because this is a guy who has been at Oregon State for multiple years, has worked behind some of the all-time greats, BJ Baylor, Jamar Jefferson, now Damian Martinez, and has quietly waited his turn. And somebody who has gotten some run this year as well, but hadn't gotten into the end zone. He scored 2 of the biggest touchdowns in Oregon State football history in this game, and was a key factor in Oregon State winning it.
And then I also want to just, Deshaun Fenwick. So here's a guy who basically lost his starting job partway through the season, has been hurt now basically ever since, in a boot and not available to go. Rushed for 53 yards at a touchdown, but I'll tell you what, his best run was that first down run on the Beavers' last possession to secure that they could take the victory formation for the rest of the game. Huge run.
Yep. Ben Gulbranson also posted 2 rushing touchdowns. They were both sneak plays. One of them, again, shouldn't have been necessary because Jack Coletto did score a touchdown, but it was called back, again, just inexplicably by those Pac-12 refs. But Gulbranson did punch it in on the next play. 4 carries for 7 yards and 2 touchdowns. It wasn't the like big rushing game that he had against ASU, but some of those plays where, he extended it a little bit and then took off for a few yards against the Sun Devils. We saw him do that a couple of times against the Ducks. So, again, just veteran moves by a first-year starter where, you don't like what you see downfield, but then you take off. And I thought it was impressive to see him make an impact in the rushing game, even when he couldn't get anything going through the air.
Yeah.
Looking at the efficiency numbers in the running game, Oregon State averaged 6.2 yards per carry to Oregon's 3.4. And Angie, the stat that I dove into here that stands out to me and is the story of this running game is that Oregon had a long run of 13 yards. That was the Ducks' longest run on the day. Oregon State had 8 rushes for 13 or more yards.
Crazy.
That's explosiveness in a nutshell right there.
Yep. And they knew what the Beavers were going to do and they still couldn't stop it. That's even more impressive.
Because the Beavers did not throw a single pass during the 21-point comeback. Just remarkable.
Seriously, I shake my head.
The defense knows what's coming and you can still do it at a high efficiency rate that's Oregon State's identity right there. In the passing game, man, this is the absolute most lopsided thing I have seen all year in any category, I think. And it's Oregon's 327 passing yards to Oregon State's 60. Ben Gulbranson goes 6 of 13 for 60 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions after starting 3 of 3 for 40 yards. So 2/3 of his passing yards for the game came on the opening drive. He went 2 of 4 overall in the second half, and finished with easily his worst game as an Oregon State quarterback, which going into the game, again, Angie, like you said, if you had told me that Ben Gulbranson would have his worst game as a Beaver and that the Beavers won, I would have told you that you were out of your mind.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's just crazy. 6 completions, the whole game.
On the receiving end of them, Silas Bolden, Tyjon Lindsey, Trayshawn Harrison all had 2 catches each to account for the entirety of the
There's your 6.
So yeah, there you go, 2 each.
2 each.
On the flip side, Bo Nix goes 27 of 41 for the 327, 2 touchdowns and no picks. So really just, I mean, complete polar opposites here. You know, you had one quarterback who was efficient, who was making big plays. You know, he found Chase Cota for what I believe went down as a 44-yard touchdown. Chase Cota led the Ducks with 9 catches for 136 yards and a touchdown. And Troy Franklin had 8 for 78 yards and a touchdown. And yet Oregon State's running game just mitigated all of that. And basically Damian Martinez and Isaiah Newell and all of them said, yeah, we don't care what you're doing through the air. We're just going to punch it down your throat. And there you go.
Yeah. No,
that was
and they were helped with some short fields, but it was, I woke up this morning and I kind of took me a minute. I was like, wait, did that really happen?
A couple of defensive performances I want to highlight here. Some of the best numbers we have seen all season. And it starts with Catano Ladapo at the safety position with a career high 17 tackles.
Beavers are going to miss him.
Yeah.
Quietly, one of the best defenders on this team.
Half a tackle for loss, as did record Omar Spates with his 13 tackles as well. So your 2 leading tacklers combined for 30 stops. That's impressive. Kyrie Fisher-Morris at the other inside linebacker spot had 11 tackles, one of them for a loss and a quarterback hurry. So,
and he had two passes broken up that really could have been picks. One could have been a pick 6.
Yeah, a couple of, and those were both during the comeback where Angie, you and I were both saying in the press box, you know, if they score a pick 6 here, like, look out, game over. And Kyrie almost had a couple of them.
Carter hit me really hard too in the press box at one point. He went, whoa,
on accident, of course. It was one of those like, whoa, did that just happen?
Yeah, exactly. It was like, whoa, did you see that? Did that just happen?
But so those high tackle numbers inflated by the fact that Oregon ran, I don't have the number here yet, but close to 100 offensive plays. Oregon State had 91 tackles total, which is an absurd number. There were just so many offensive plays for both teams in this game, which is why I want
to highlight Connor Johnson's comment over here because he says, I think Stover's minutes should go down to give a few more to Chatfield or Lolohea going forward. I totally agree. I think I said that to Carter earlier in maybe the season or before the game started, saying, I need to see something from Corey Stover because I'm not seeing enough to warrant the playing time. He's I mean, as an edge rusher, he's not making that. Now he's doing some other things in the defense, but it's not getting to the quarterback.
I'll use the Lolohea mention as kind of a segue here into the tackle for loss and sack categories where Oregon State was completely dominant. Yeah. There were 2 sacks in this game, one for each side. And the Beavers recording a sack at all, I think, is notable, considering Oregon had only given up 3 going into the game all year, far and away the best mark in the country. And it was Sione Lolohea and James Rawls on the defensive line combining to sack Bo Nix. But the Beavers with 7 tackles for loss, Angie, it's one of the best performances of the year. And it came against an offensive line that may win the Joe Moore Award. It will be a finalist for sure if it isn't already. One of the best offensive lines in the country, an elite quarterback, and 2 running backs who are, again, among the best in the Pac-12. And the Beavers stopped them behind the line 7 times and recorded one of the 4 sacks against Bo Nix all year.
Yeah, I think that is something that maybe gets overlooked in the whole thing is just how good Oregon is. That this wasn't going to be a cakewalk game. This was a tough game with some. You look maybe recruiting ranking wise, Oregon is just stacked talent wise. Oregon State held their own.
The Beavers, I thought, also protected up front really well. You mentioned the talent. Brandon Dorless, Noah Sewell. That front 7 is loaded for Oregon, and the Ducks only got into the backfield once. One tackle for loss, and it was the sack. With
a backup center and a backup guard in play. Yeah. The backup center is probably, listening to Peter, Peter Riley Osborne, but he's still just a little undersized, especially for going against Oregon. And he held his own.
Yeah.
Huge.
Impressive stuff in the trenches. Again, we talk about Oregon State's identity, being a physical team, being a run-first team. And I thought Oregon State converted on that.
Yeah.
And you really see it there in the tackle for loss numbers. And, the Oregon State defense, for all the improvements it's made, we have had some concerns about the front seven, but it stepped up.
I lost you there for a second.
Oh, hopefully I'm back.
Sorry. You're back.
All right. Let's move to the turnover category because this was a big one. And I think that the numbers are deceptive here because at the end of the day, you've got Oregon State with 3 and Oregon with 0. But when you add in the turnovers on downs, Oregon with 5 turnovers on downs, Oregon State with 1. Essentially, you've got your turnovers at 5-4 in favor of the Beavs rather than 3-0 in favor of the Ducks.
And then I would actually include the muffed punt, the snap, and also the block.
Yeah, the muffed punt
those are in essence, turnovers as well. Turnovers on downs.
So the fumbled punt snap does go as a turnover on
that's
downs.
one. Okay.
But the blocked punt again, that flips field position by about 50 yards. So that absolutely, you can basically say Oregon had 6 turnovers to Oregon State's 4 when you combine all of the turnovers on downs, the big plays on special teams. I thought special teams played a huge role in this game. There were a lot of questions about it in the post-game press conference. One that won't get talked about a whole lot is the kickoff, where Oregon State, I believe it was Everett Hayes doing kickoffs again, placed the ball right at the goal line. It bounced straight up, and Oregon had no choice but to bring it out. They brought it out to about the 10-yard line and just have horrible field position there. And again, that was one of those field position battles where Oregon State took advantage of it and had a short field to work with. So special teams playing a huge role in this thing. The turnovers on downs, I think probably the story of the second half when you're talking about the Oregon State defense. But on the flip side, Oregon State did not play a clean game, and it started with Ben Gulbranson.
Yeah, completely.
He had the 2 interceptions. And Angie, this is a stat that Eric brought up while we were working in the media room. Those 2 interceptions were returned for 63 yards by Christian Gonzalez and Jeffrey Bassa. Oregon State had 60 passing yards in this game. Oregon had 63 interception return yards.
Yeah.
So the Ducks actually produced more on Oregon State's passes than Oregon State did, which is an unbelievable stat.
How bad Oregon State's passing game was.
Trayshawn Harrison also fumbled after making a catch to that was, I believe, to set up the final drive, the final touchdown drive for Oregon during that lull in the middle of the game. Any other stats, Angie, that you want to highlight? I feel like we threw a bunch of numbers and
I think those are the big ones. I do. I think those turnovers on downs were huge, and maybe don't get looked at as on turnovers. But definitely Oregon State won the turnover battle when you consider that. Yeah.
All right, we're going to move through the game flow section really quickly here. There are, again, I talk about how many plays the Ducks ran in this thing. There were so many possessions in this game.
There were 8 possessions just like at the start of the third quarter, like back and forth. Like
if you look at the drive chart, it's absolutely absurd. But I think what's funny about it is there were 3 possessions total in the first quarter.
Yeah.
So the first one, and I want to highlight this because I thought very early on we saw that special teams were going to be a factor in this game. Field goal kicking had been a major point of concern for Oregon State coming into this game. Everett Hayes looked like he completely lost it, at Arizona State, missing that 23-yarder at the very end. What does he do? Comes out and hits a 50-yarder on the first drive of the game. Ben Gulbranson goes 3 for 3 for 40 yards. The drive stalls at the 31, and then Hayes just knocks a 50-yarder through. And I thought that was big, for him to get some confidence there. Obviously, Oregon State didn't need him the rest of the way, but a huge field goal there to get the Beavers on the board first.
Yeah.
But Angie, let's talk about then Oregon's response because, it was a back and forth game until both teams had their meltdown moments. And this is where the game, I think, was at its best. And on the ensuing drive, Bo Nix found Chase Cota for a 44-yard touchdown. Did you have any concerns about Oregon State's defense after what you saw it do on the first drive? Because it felt like both teams kind of moved the ball like a hot knife through butter a little bit.
Yeah.
And of course, it came to a head with Cota's 44-yard touchdown.
I wasn't. I mean, the first two potentially, because I knew we weren't going to be able to trade touchdowns for field goals. But no, I was a little more concerned when when Oregon started gashing them in the run game. But then Oregon State was able to tighten that up.
Yeah. Gulbranson snuck it in on the next drive. So that's when Levingood was injured.
Down.
It was at the end of the first quarter. Second quarter, again, it was more of that back and forth stuff. The defense is actually kind of came to play a little bit after both teams scored on their first drives. I thought once it settled down a little bit that, I look back on it and said, all right, well, both teams script their opening drive. Yeah. They got exactly what they wanted. Those two offensive coordinators who are great in their craft. Of course, Kenny Dillingham just took the Arizona State job, so clearly he's good at what he does. We know Brian Lindgren is good with his scripted stuff at Oregon State. So I didn't feel like it was going to become some sort of shootout after both defensives settled in there. Okay, so let's talk about where the momentum flipped and some of the plays that occurred in there, because things really did snowball for Oregon State.
Yeah.
And I want to highlight some of the plays that
but you say it snowballed. It didn't snowball because at half it was still only 14-10.
It's true. Where it snowballed was really in the third quarter. I think.
Yeah.
But so I think you have to give Oregon credit for taking advantage of, Oregon State's down at the 5-yard line. It has a chance to make this a 2-score game, but very quickly you saw like a 21-28 point turnaround where you say, okay, well, Oregon State looked like it was going to score a touchdown. So there's 7 points there, flips the other way immediately with Oregon scoring a touchdown. That's a 14-point flip in the span of one possession.
Yeah.
Troy Franklin scores a 9-yard touchdown as Oregon takes the lead. And then that is where it snowballed after after halftime. Oregon actually went 3-and-out on its first drive of the third quarter. But then
Oregon State.
I felt like, I felt like really the play that prompted the snowball was Ben Gulbranson's interception to Jeffrey Bossa. He returned it to the 2-yard line.
Yeah.
And that set up a touchdown on the next play. I don't have the actual stat broadcast drive chart here, so I don't know how many points Oregon scored in X amount of time. But this went from an Oregon State lead to a 21-point deficit in the span of about half a quarter. Yeah.
No, I think it was like the first 4 minutes of the third quarter.
Yeah. Okay. So if you had to pick a play where this flipped for Oregon State, do you think it's the Damian Martinez 43-yard run at the end of the third quarter?
Yeah, absolutely. Because Harrison fumbled. So, they had all these, we had a 3-and-out, they had a 5-yard TD run. Harrison has his fumble at the Oregon State 42. They settle for a field goal. Oregon has to settle for a field goal there. And then, wait, I'm looking here. Oh yeah. So then, the very last drive at the third quarter was the Martinez 43-yard run, capped off by a Fenwick touchdown run. But that 43-yard run really was the start of the turnaround.
I felt like it woke up the crowd a little bit. Oregon's only points the rest of the way came at the very beginning of the fourth. Camden Lewis hit his second field goal. It was a 29-yarder. And then we don't have to talk about every scoring play the rest of the way, but Oregon State obviously scored 4 touchdowns, and it took advantage of all of those turnovers on downs that we just talked about. Oregon turned the ball over on downs on 4 straight possessions, and Oregon State turned every single one of them into a touchdown. That is the definition of turning defense into offense. We talk about that a lot in basketball, transition points and whatnot, but points off of turnovers in football are absolutely huge because that's where you see the flips. That's where you see it looked like 7 points going that way, 7 points going that way. And in football, it's really hard to bounce back from that.
So then a couple defensive plays I want to highlight. The first being Oregon's second to last possession. They were at their own 28. They went for it on fourth down. And that is the play. Jaden Grant, he just stuffed Nix, like behind the line of scrimmage. And he told us in the press conference how he recognized the play when they were lined up, told his nickel, told Ryan Cooper, hey, I'm going this way, you cover this side. And I mean, that was right there, that heart of a champion of this is not, they are not getting a first down. The second, and
can I pause right here real quick? Because I want to say that I think that exemplifies out coaching.
Yes.
You know, players can take it upon themselves to dive into all the film they want, but at the end of the day, it's coaches that are scheming it and kind of pointing out, okay, this is a tendency here. This is, what they like to run. I thought Trent Bray outcoached Kenny Dillingham on that play. Oregon State was in the exact position it needed to be to stop that particular play call. And again, eerily reminiscent of Oregon's 4th down conversion attempt at Washington. Between its own 20 and 30. You've got a running play dialed up. It looked like an option. Nix keeps it instead of giving it off this time, and Oregon State still stopped it. I thought that reflected more on the coaching than anything else.
Well, and then the other point, and this one goes back, that 4th down or that 4-down stance that Oregon State had on the Ducks' last possession to keep them out of the end zone ranks right up there with 2007 at Cal.
Absolutely.
It was beautiful.
The Ducks had gone, so that drive ended at 12 plays for 72 yards and it ended at Oregon State's 3. There were a couple of run plays. Oregon ran it, I believe, 3 times in a row to get up to 4th down. And then they passed it on 4th. They called a timeout to set it up. Oregon State,
because they had a jumbo package in at one point. Right. Oregon State brought in all their linemen, and then
Oregon State countered with a lineup that was so cool to see. So John Miller came in at linebacker because he's huge. Jack Coletto was out in coverage on a tight end out wide. Something that it was one of those formations and personnel packages that you don't see very often. But to Oregon State's credit, matched up so well against one of the best offensive lines in the country. And then how about Alex Austin making a great play in coverage on the 4th down to seal the game?
Huge.
You mentioned Deshaun Fenwick picking up that first down on the offensive possession that ensued as well. Ran it 3 times, got the first down, victory formation, ball game, rushed the field, party in the USA.
Yep. So much.
Do we need to talk about Party in the USA being Oregon State's new anthem?
I love it. Let's do it. I mean, we got John Warren raising his hands in the press box.
Steve Grass.
Yeah,
all of the media members dancing along to it. It's kind of trivial, but there's something to it. We've had these discussions about, do they need to move on from TNT before the 4th quarter? Do they need to do sing-alongs and all this stuff? Party in the USA, for whatever reason, has been one of those things that Oregon State fans have just really latched onto, particularly the students, as that 4th quarter sing-along. But it's, for whatever reason,
it's so much better than shout. So much better than shout.
Yeah, PM in the YouTube chat saying Party in the USA, greater than sign, shout. Potentially a new tradition there for Oregon State that I think, because it's so weird how these things get cemented in traditionalism, but Oregon State winning this game and playing Party in the USA afterwards, and Party in the USA being that rallying song while Oregon State is coming back from the huge deficit. Like, when you think of that comeback and when you think of the celebration on the field, you're going to think of that song playing. I think it's somewhat of a new anthem for this football program, as funny as it may be.
So fun.
All right. Let's revisit our keys to the game real quick, and then we have a couple of damn questions to answer from Twitter, and then we'll get out of here. We have crossed the hour mark here. I knew we were going to go long, but we'll see if we can cruise to the finish line here. I feel like, Angie, you and I have, at least me, I feel like I've rambled in this thing, but I knew coming into this was going to be a word salad type, just stream of consciousness podcast, because there are so many things to digest from this game. But let's go back and revisit our keys to the game and start with what we said for the offense, for Oregon State's offense. We both agreed Ben Gulbranson was going to have, I said, his best passing game. I said it was a necessity. You said the Beavers have to have a downfield passing attack. Turned out it was not, in fact, a necessity. In fact, throwing the ball at all was not a necessity. The Beavers scoring 4 touchdowns.
I don't think they're going to win many games if they have to rely on just the run game, but it worked. So who are we to question, Carter?
And I think, what's interesting too, Angie, is when I think about when Oregon State has had success over Oregon in recent years, it's been bullying them at the line of scrimmage.
Yeah.
Go back to 2016, Ryan Null ran all over the Ducks. 2020, it was Jamar Jefferson posting the most rushing yards in the series, close to 250 yards. And then in this one, it was Oregon State racking up, again, over 250 as a team, 6.2 per carry, 5 rushing touchdowns. I don't know what it is, but that has been the key to Oregon State beating Oregon over the last half decade.
Yep. And you just got to go with it.
Okay. On the flip side, Angie, you said Oregon State had to stop the Ducks rushing attack.
And they did.
I marked this as a success.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think it was, it's not 9 yards like they let Cal run for, but I mean, this was a very good running team, and they did slow them.
I said that Oregon State was going to have to find a way to pressure Bo Nix without opening up things downfield. It's that balancing act you have to do between pressuring a quarterback when he's got a great offensive line, when he's mobile, when healthy, but also taking away his options downfield. I thought Oregon State did that to perfection in this one.
Yeah.
It had, like I said, one of the 4 sacks against Nix this year, 5 quarterback hurries. So he was under duress quite a bit. But then downfield, 5 pass breakups. They held Bo Nix to 66% passing, which sounds like a pretty good number for a quarterback, but it's still quite a bit lower than what he averages. Nix entered the game at about a 72% rate. And he had -5 rushing yards too on 5 carries. 2 of those were actual designed runs, and one of them was a sack. Bo Nix has been the most electric running quarterback in the country with his, I believe, 14 touchdowns. I thought they defended Bo Nix to near perfection.
Yeah, no, they held him in check because he is their biggest offensive weapon.
All right. You've waited long enough. If you were one of the few who asked a damn question on Twitter, we're going to get to it right here. And we'll start with PM, who I know is still listening live on YouTube. PM, we'll start with your question here. PM says, I'm 30. I went to my first game in 2006 against USC. This was my first Civil War game and second game ever. In my opinion, that was the greatest live event I've ever been to. How did the crowd sound on the other side of the field? Because my ears are still ringing. Angie and I talked about the atmosphere a little bit at the beginning of the episode, but Angie, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how that compared to years where, maybe Stadium is not sold out, but you've got 28,000 fans dispersed around the whole thing. Did you feel like the way I felt it sounded against USC was that it was kind of like a wall of noise? Is that kind of how you felt?
No, because
it was. It really is. It's weird to describe it as, the fans are all on one side, so they hear it from their perspective. But from our perspective, it's kind of a weird.
It is weird because then we have the speakers on top of us too. But the crowd noise was so loud. And like I said, on the field level, I think is where you really hear it, because it's just kind of raining down on you with that new construction coming up too. I'm making hand signals, so if you're not even seeing me on the podcast, but the backside, the new side of Reeser is coming up way more, brick and concrete up than even during the USC game, just holding that sound in. The field level is very, very loud, very loud. So PM also adds that, and by live event, he means better than any concert, Blazer game, and more. It really did. I shout out to Sarah Alcano and her events team at Oregon State, because like I said, I've been going to Oregon State games since the 90s when I was a student, and what they've done from a fan engagement is amazing. And I have to say, I know some older fans aren't fans of the DJ, but that just keeps the atmosphere, everything. So, I mean, it's so much better than back in the day when it was just chainsaw noise and some of that.
Brian Miller in the YouTube chat says that the timing for the tail slap on kickoffs was always off and felt weird. I actually didn't notice this from our side, and I think some of that comes from the speakers that are above the press box is mainly what the fans on the other side are hearing. And obviously sound travels a little differently than, somebody clapping on their side. So I can see where there might be a bit of a disconnect between the prompt on one side of the stadium and the actual clap on the other side. Pacific Beaver says, got to practice those tail slaps. I think that's a fun tradition that they introduced last year. Let's move on to our next damn question from Twitter. William Schulten asks, what in the world do we do about the quarterback position moving forward? Angie, this is a question that I know you you have an answer for, and I'll throw it to you. I think it starts with the transfer portal, but I think long term we're looking at Aiden Childs as being the answer here, right?
Yeah, I mean, so if there's one point of criticism that I have with Jonathan Smith and Brian Lindgren, is the fact that these guys are offensive guys. Smith was a quarterback, and they have really struggled to recruit a quarterback, a solid quarterback, not just, a quarterback, but a good one. Aiden Childs is that guy. But you cannot expect a 17-year-old to come in December, January, and he could. I mean, maybe he gets in there, but Oregon State needs to go to the portal, and they need another guy that maybe has a year. When you look at the teams this year, just in the Pac-12, I know we talked about this in an earlier pod, that the best teams in the conference. I mean, you look at USC, new transfer, Washington with Penix, transfer, Cam Ward at Washington State, transfer, Arizona, transfer. I mean, you go up and down the top teams in the conference, and they all went to the portal and got an experienced signal caller. I am not sold that. I mean, first of all, Carter and I were talking on the sideline. We don't even know where Chance Nolan is. I even asked the question yesterday whether he was still with the program, because I felt it was really weird to not even see him in street clothes on the sideline. He is apparently still with the program, so you really have to wonder, this injury must be really bad. So is he even going to be a viable option next year? Ben Gulbranson, unless he takes a ginormous leap, I just don't, this season has felt like Oregon State is only as good as the quarterback play. So I really do think you need to go to the portal, and maybe Aiden. I mean, I do say Aiden Childs is the future, Carter. He's going to do some special things, but you also don't want to ruin a guy's confidence too and throw him in too early.
Yeah, I see Aiden Childs taking over as a second or third year player. I think, he's going to come into this program really raw. Like you said, he's going to be 17 when he enrolls early. He is on the younger end to begin with. I mean, think about Damian Martinez, who came in as a 17-year-old as well. He didn't turn 18 until football season started. So
Clint Moses here said injury looked Jake Luton type bad.
Totally.
I agree. Okay. He did walk. I mean, he walked off. It wasn't.
He actually played through it.
He played through it for a couple plays. Whereas Jake Luton was like stretchered off. But Jake Luton was on the sideline in street clothes.
Yeah.
And we have not seen Chance at all.
Yeah. I could pretty much tell you with almost near certainty that he isn't in the coach's box either, because I haven't seen him on our side of Reeser. But it just
it's just I guess my dynamic.
Yeah, my answer to the question,
portal and Aiden Childs.
Yeah.
This is the short answer. I told this to a group of friends in a text group just a couple days ago. Aiden Childs is the first quarterback that under Smith's tenure that I've been excited about.
Yeah. My answer to the question is Oregon State has to go find a portal quarterback to start next year. I would be curious to see what Ben Gulbranson looks like after a year of more reps in spring camp and fall camp. If he enters camp as the guy, I'm curious if those, obviously the first quarterback takes more reps than anybody else in practice. I'm curious to see if that would translate to decent improvement. But I just think if Oregon State wants to have success next year, it's going to have to bring in an experienced guy. I think this is one of those situations where you could go after a grad transfer where you're only going to get 1 year out of him.
Yep, a one and done guy.
Because you expect Aiden Childs to step in year 2, maybe year 3, as somebody who can lead your program for a couple of years. Give him a year to develop behind a redshirt senior guy who's coming in for his 5th or 6th year. I think this is the year to do it. The key is to make it happen. Obviously, we go back to the JT Daniels situation last year. It's not easy to bring these guys in.
No. But I'm going to take it a step further.
If they can hit a home run in the transfer portal here, look out.
But I'm going to take it a step further because I think it's unfair to put all of the pressure on quarterback.
Yeah.
Because Oregon State still doesn't have great wide receiver play. And you cannot put all the pressure on a quarterback if your wide receivers struggle to get open.
Jerry, you won in the chat. Brings up a good point. Ben Gulbranson 7-1 as a starter. So
yeah, but he hasn't looked good doing it.
Right.
Sorry.
I mean, there is something to be said for the way the defense has carried this team, but
I would say
it's a good
Oregon
point. It's a
State
good point.
Oregon State is a great quarterback away though from being
11-1.
11-1 right now. So
Brendan Fitzpatrick asks on Twitter, what is the best or worst bowl game we can go to now? Again, Angie and I will dive into that in the next week or two.
yeah.
I see best case scenario as being the Holiday Bowl, worst case being the Sun Bowl, and potentially the most likely now being one of the Sun Bowl or the Las Vegas Bowl. Personally, I'm rooting for the Vegas Bowl. And lastly, Joshua Calloway asks, I feel we need to secure Trent Bray permanently. Would you try and keep him and get an offensive coordinator to step up or go in another direction? The wording on this, I'm a little confused, but I think the point that's being made here is, do you put all of your cards into Trent Bray staying and writing the defense? I don't know, Angie. I guess I'll frame it this way: do you make a change at offensive coordinator?
I don't. I mean, as frustrating as Bray as Lindgren can be from time to time, I think he still does some pretty creative things and does some things well. Quarterback play has got to get better. And, I never thought I'd hear the day that I said Oregon State offense was not good. And I'm not saying it's bad. It's just not great. It's not at the elite level yet. Now, Bray, absolutely. They need to do whatever they can, pay him top Pac-12 level coordinator money because you cannot lose him. What he has done with this defense, and this might be another whole podcast for us, Carter, what he has done with this defense in 1 year's time, I'm so excited what he can do. Get another edge rush or two. And you know what? I'm going to promise right now, Carter and I will come back and do another pod to talk recruiting because we are 3 weeks away from signing day. And that's a whole nother topic that I have a ton of info on. So we'll come back and talk about that recruiting.
One more from Joshua, and then we'll get out of here. This kind of goes back to the conversation we just had about the quarterbacks and potentially a change at coordinator. But Joshua asks, what should be done about the offense sputtering at times and it not being as effective as it should? Do you change the quarterback, the offensive coordinator, the scheme, all a combination? Quarterback, I think, again, it comes back to the quarterback. But like Angie said, Oregon State needs more talent at wide receiver. It needs height there. And
a true home run guy. Oregon State does. I mean, we have, Anthony Gould has shown flashes, Silas Bolden, but they're also small and they can't sometimes get off the line. They can't on a bump and run system. So a bigger body or someone that can actually be a home run. And it's not, these are little things. I mean, this is just where is what Oregon State needs to take that next step to be an elite team.
The Beavers will be just fine on the offensive line. They'll be great at tight end for years to come. I don't see those being an issue. So I think you improve your passing game by changing your personnel at quarterback and wide receiver, and I think the scheme will be just fine. And Brian Lindgren will always be good for a head scratcher or two, but he is still one of the best coordinators in this conference, I believe. And with the right personnel, I think it'll unlock a lot more of that playbook. I
mean, and think about you guys. Oregon State lost their number one target in Musgrave at the end of game 2 this year. So Musgrave was going to be that safety net dump off guy. And this is something Carter and I talked about from fall camp. It was that Oregon State was struggling to move the football at times. So it'll come.
These are great off-season conversations that we will have over the next 9 months. Kind of hard to believe regular season's over, Angie. We did it. We made it.
We made it.
Actually, you know what? Here, we'll get to an hour and 20 and we'll end with this from the YouTube chat. This is a good question. Brian Miller says, should we be scared of someone poaching Martinez? I have heard this question raised from a variety of people. I think they even mentioned on the broadcast, Rod Gilmore brought up Damian Martinez potentially being attracted by NIL suitors at other schools. I could see it happening, but I think Oregon State, now that it is in the NIL space, will do all it can to hold on to guys like Martinez. And again, Damian Martinez is a Jonathan Smith guy through and through. I'm not terribly concerned about him leaving. Yeah,
this is where fans are going to need to step up. I mean, as hard as this is. I mean, Oregon State is never going to have the money of an Alabama or Georgia or Oregon or SC, but fans are going to need to step up if we're going to see Oregon State be able to retain and recruit. But
Oregon
that's another
State
topic
38.
too.
Yep. Oregon State 38, Oregon 34, meeting number 126. Oregon State comes back and wins it in absolutely remarkable fashion. Angie and I were there. We have more content up at BeaverBlitz. In fact, while we were recording this, a bunch of photos just went live on the site. So if you want to scroll through some of those and see Angie and I's favorite photos from the game, those are up. That's what she said will be live for our VIP members tomorrow on Monday. So again, just another reason to take advantage of our 75% off deal at BeaverBlitz that runs through Cyber Monday. Not going to find a deal better than this.
Not going to, even if you're a member, maybe your brother or your dad or your wife or your girlfriend would enjoy their own BeaverBlitz membership. It's a good gift.
And
you can direct message me and I can help you make it happen.
On that note, we'll get out of here. We'll let you get on with your Sunday evening if you've been watching us live. Thank you to everyone who listened to us throughout the regular season. We are not done yet. I can promise you that. In fact, I believe we're going to come back later in the week, if not next weekend, to talk some bowl season stuff, to look ahead to National Signing Day. I mean, there's still no shortage of stuff going on at Oregon State between kind of this moratorium period, if you will, between the regular season and bowl season. Of course, we're going to cover bowl season in depth. We'll be back to our regularly scheduled programming as far as game preview content goes during bowl week, whenever that may be. But we will keep you apprised of that situation and cover everything that occurs between now and then. So, Angie, anything to add before we get out?
No, what a season.
9-3.
9-3, Carter.
Oregon State has won 9 football games, and we'll leave you on that reminder.
Hey,
Angie,
one more thing.
Yep.
Oregon is the Beaver State.
It's true. It is true. You can follow her on Twitter at Angie Machado 1. You can follow me at Carter Bahns. Thanks for bearing with us through a really long episode where we kind of just spoke randomly at times. But we'll be back for a more structured episode of the Damn Podcast in a couple of days, if not a week. But thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll talk to you then.